Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing a full breakdown of how I made this track in FL Studio. So this is the full project file for one of my latest releases called Everything Changes, which I dropped with Chromine Tales. Big shout out to those guys for the support. They're a pretty new label and they reached out to me for a release, so I ended up cooking this one up special just for them. But let's just kind of dive right into what I did here and show you guys how you can do the same. I started this one off the way I start pretty much everything off, with a nice simple piano part. This time I didn't go with a steady flowing arpeggio like you may have seen on the channel before. Instead, I've got a chord that rings out for 3 beats with some transition notes, and then a nice long extended chord in the middle for 2 full measures that is sort of leading into the 3rd chord with a really long extended ascending arpeggio here. We've got just a simple E major, no 7th extension in the main chord, with this, I guess, leading 7th on the D sharp going into that 2nd chord. And that goes into this A7, which I took the 7th note out of the right hand of this so that I would have room to lead into the ascending arpeggio that I do through here. And that leads into a F sharp minor 7. So really simple 3 chords, 4 bars, and that repeats with some slight variation throughout the full track, which clocks in about just over 2 minutes here. I was hoping that with that much space, it wouldn't be too redundant on the ears, and I definitely let the guitar carry most of the melodic stuff going on this track. As far as processing goes on that, it is, of course, my very favorite Lab soft piano. And all I've got on the processing for this is 1 instance of RC20, just a tiny bit of wobble, no noise, good bit of space, good bit of distortion, and a little bit of the magnetic feature. And then I routed that over to what in this project called the guitar verb, but this is more similar to something I mentioned in a previous video where I basically use a really large reverb and turn it into like a forced pad. So the way I did that was with 1 instance of Valhalla Supermassive, a relatively large reverb here with a nice long decay time, a little bit of EQ to cut out all of the lows, so that's really only the mids and the highs that are floating through in the background of the track. And then a nice fruity limiter, which I believe is indeed sidechained to the kick. Let's take a listen to what the piano sounds like with and without that reverb layer, just to get a sense of what I was doing with that particular feature here of the mix. So this is the way it actually was in the track. And then if we turn off that reverb layer, you can hear it's just a little bit harsher, obviously much more forward, a little bit less present. But it's important to remember that I'm routing it to the reverb layer as well as the master, so that it's keeping all of this attack and all the character of the main piano sound while still having that nice reverbed out sound attached to it. From there, I went ahead and added a pad, which I've just consolidated here to save on some CPU. But you might recognize this from another video I did recently. It's the slow strings preset I put together in Vital. I did all the processing just right in Vital on this one, so what we got going on here is a pretty harsh low pass filter to take out the airiness that I added to give it that string feel. Absolutely drenched in reverb. A high pass EQ to take out any of the rumble, and then another low pass filter going on here. Just to really take out all that high information and soften that tone up a good bit. All this is doing chord-wise is following the exact same chord progression as the piano is. I literally copied the MIDI over and then just took some notes out so it wasn't too crowded. So adding the pad to the piano, we start to get a nice little ambience going. And then early on in the production of this, I added what ended up being one of my favorite layers I've come up with in a while, and it's this pluck ARP that I've got going on. So once again, I essentially copied the MIDI over and really simplified it so it'd be a little bit more rhythmically interesting. But exact same chords going on through here, hitting kind of loosely on the 2 of every measure. I think this might be a stock Serum preset even that I just found. It's like just a pluck sound, a dark pluck sound, but I did a little bit of playing around with it to try to make it a little bit more flavorful. So right out of the box, we've got an automated low pass filter that kind of shoots up with every pluck so that the pluck, appears and disappears. Really sharp attack time and a pretty fast delay, obviously, or decay, excuse me. Obviously, that's kind of the nature of a pluck. Didn't do anything to the oscillators here. There is a little bit of a noise and some sub going on. Really where I did my work was adding a bunch of ping pong delay and putting a ton of hall reverb. We've also got an EQ cutting out a bunch of lows, making sure we're not fighting with the bass. And then a low pass filter here, mixed to 100. That's taking out a bunch of like high buzzy information that we're getting from those oscillators. And then with this patch, because I just copied the MIDI and extended them out to be a couple of beats, I actually went into the settings of the plugin, and this is a good tip if you didn't know this in FL Studio, is you can turn on an arpeggiator. You can have it just ascend through the notes, descend through the notes, all the way to the top and immediately turn around, or all the way to the top, repeat a note, come back down, or sometimes my favorite is this just random. It just picks a note in the chord that you got in the MIDI and then arpeggiates through it. So with the randomized arpeggio going and then all this delay that we added in the actual instance of Serum, we end up with this like really nice, like twinkly, it's kind of like, I guess twinkly, I guess is the only word I can describe it, but it ended up being a cool texture that I feel like really transformed this track right when I added it. So let's give that a listen by itself. So all that reverb and delay is just really like putting it in a pretty interesting space, giving it this kind of like glitchy feel. If we listen to it without any of the reverb and delay, obviously it's just going to be the arpeggio by itself. So now when we listen to that in context with the piano and the pad, we get some pretty cool like swelling plucks going on there in the background that I think give it a nice ambience. So obviously you can hear that that's super present as it is now, so that's why I did the next thing and I put a little automated stereo separation. So in this case, rather than using like a fruity stereo enhancer, I use this handy little knob down here that I believe you can get on, if you click this View Extra Volume Stereo Properties button, you get a couple of extra controls here. So to the left is wider in the stereo field, I believe. 62% separated. To the right is more narrow. So what I did here is I sent everything out wide, which will also tend to make things a little bit less present, a little bit less forward, because you have nothing up the middle essentially. And then with the automation, I had it kind of bring in, and then once more elements came in, I had them drop, or I dropped the automation way down so that it was much more up the middle, taking up a lot less room to make room for the new elements that came in here. You'll hear that in action as we work our way through the other layers. Let's take a quick moment, go through the drums real quick. You may notice from all of these MLs, I used exclusively drums from one of Mondo Loop's packs, as seems to be the theme on whatever tracks I decide to break down on this channel for some reason. I do think a worthwhile tip is that when you're looking for drum sounds that work well together, it tends to be the easiest to go with one kit. It's not always the case, but for the most part, someone that's designing a pack has a certain style in mind, or maybe they have a certain personal style, so they're much more likely to make sounds that are cohesive with one another. So if you're doing things kind of in a pinch like I was for this track, where I was trying to get it done so that I could get it over to this new label, this is a good approach to sort of take. Pretty simple rhythm. It was obviously trying to be like kind of a sleepy, dreamy vibe. I've got a nice simple kick snare pattern, and I did a lot to really fill it in with 3 different shaker layers that are sort of bouncing around in the stereo field and taking up different spaces on their own rhythms. Actually, no, I had 4 different shakers, sorry. 3 of which that I played in on a beat pad. 1 I clicked in, added a nice brushed hi-hat to sort of lock in that 1 and the 3, and a couple of nice wood perk textures that kind of bounce around and give it a little bit more bounce here. So this is the full loop altogether. So yeah, good bit of crunchiness, good bit of texture, a little bit of swing going on, you know, nothing too crazy. Definitely wanted to keep the hip hop inspiration, but keep it pretty sleepy. I also added a couple of ambiances from Mondo Loop's packs, Busy Market and Coffee Shop. I believe these are both Mondo Loop. If not, I apologize to whoever actually made them. And then one more thing on that sort of percussive side, I did add a Foley loop from Mondo Loops, which is holding down the 4 in the intro. It's really kind of driving things to build the energy up into the track. And then one shaker loop, which I feel like complements the hi-hat and shaker pattern that I had going on nicely. So that's a total of 5 shaker layers plus a hi-hat layer to really kind of give some drive to that kick and snare. Something to keep in mind in your own productions, that it doesn't need to be just one layer per type of percussive layer. So the final sort of core element of this main loop was, of course, adding a little bit of bass. Once again, like I said, this was sort of a rush project. I was trying to get it out quickly but make it sound good, so I went to a bunch of old favorites that you've seen on the channel before. We've got Keybase, one of my favorite free plugins here. Doesn't look like I actually did anything to change it from the stock preset here. I just let the kind of aggressive hits ring out and did hard cuts matched up with the drum groove to kind of, rather than just have like constant sustained bass, I like the way that it broke up a little bit here to give it a little bit more groove. Oh, and one other thing is I did end up bringing these ghost notes in from the main piano part just to kind of see, or just kind of show you guys what I was thinking relative to the actual chord progression. So for this first chord, hit straight on the root note, lead in with another root note up to the second root note, cut that off at the same place that I cut the first one off, and then I've got this lead note back to the chord because this second and third measures stay on one chord, but I figured I could kind of trick the ear a little bit to make it feel like it's changing even though it actually doesn't, with this nice F sharp, which I think is it's actually kind of an interesting, it's the 6th of the chord, but it matches the first note of the arpeggio, so it ends up being kind of a cool feeling, I think, if I remember. But looking at this without listening, it seems like a surprising move I made. But nonetheless, I do like doing that a little bit with leading notes when I'm sustaining on the same chord or repeating a chord, using a transition note to make it feel like it's going somewhere different, even though it stays right home. And then same deal, repeated the root note on the 1 and the 3 here for that third measure, leading note back into the root for the 4th measure. So not a lot of departure from the root note. I really like the rhythm to lead, but hanging out on the root, I think it gives good bounce without having to overcomplicate the sonic profile. I've given this tip before, but we've got a pretty complicated main melody going on. Our piano's moving a good bit. We've got a pretty rich pad, that twinkly ARP thing that we've got going on. And then the guitar, which I'll get into in a couple seconds, is also super busy. So I figured let's keep the bass pretty simple and spacious so that we're not fighting on every part of the frequency spectrum for too much attention for the ear. So yeah, the full loop altogether sounds like this. I just really like that pluck thing ringing out there. But yeah, let's get into the guitar layers I laid down here. So the first one that came in right in the intro is a nice little strum layer. You'll notice that they're all consolidated because my CPU does not like when I'm running the amp simulator. But long story short, I just kind of did like a really simple plucking pattern, kind of an arpeggio on the root in the 3rd or the root in the 5th, following the same chord progression as the piano. And I ran that into ye old Archetype Plini Electric Sunrise intro preset, shaved a bunch of the lows out so that we're not fighting with the bass. Got a little bit of compression, and of course some delay and reverb that I did not change the settings on, so pretty true to the original preset, just with a little bit of EQ adjustment here. And then out of that, did some more high passing with the EQ, cut those lows out so that we had plenty of room for the bass limiter, which is just kind of gluing things down, trapping those peaks. Threw some RC20 on there and actually had the noise with the radio type on a follow function. So this essentially just inserts a little bit of kind of like white staticky radio noise as the volume goes up on the guitar, so it makes the guitar sound like it has a radio hiss to it. A little bit of distortion and a tiny bit of extra reverb on top of what's coming out of the amp sim. One more compressor, not much gain, pretty reasonable threshold on the vintage type to give it a little bit of flavor. Another limiter here, side chained once again to the kick. My favorite TDR Nova, taken out, I think this is around 250 hertz if I had to guess, because that is a common problem frequency. Yeah, 274. I found just a frequency that I didn't love. Doing a little dynamic EQ there. And then one more limiter just to really squish it down and make sure that we're not having anything poke out too much. And that, with the intro, sounds like this. So actually, I guess correction on what I said. I let it ring out in the intro and then I started the plucking. So in the intro, just letting it rip. Sorry about the reverb turning on. And then into the actual song, you can see the waveform changes because I was actually plucking the guitar. So that gives it a little bit more motion, a little bit more foundation to build on here. And right with that first drop, we've got the first sort of lead guitar coming in. Same effects chain, exact same thing I just ran through. It's just this time I'm playing more of a lead part. So let's give a listen to that whole drop all together and you get a sense of what I was going for. So coming out of this A section into the B section, I did some nice transition work that I'm fairly happy with both like some subtractive things and a little bit of automation here, and then changing up the guitar line. So let's dive into those details real quick just to show you how I was thinking about the energy profile of the song. So right around measure 13, like I said, I cut out the brush hi-hat and both of the wood perk layers. So a lot of that percussive bounce is going away. As well as the shaker. Like I said, that was sort of solidifying the shaker groove that I had going. So our percussion simplifies but doesn't disappear here. I automate the pluck art back out wide. That's basically taking up the space that I took away in the percussion, but it's obviously occupying a different frequency range. The bass drops out as well. I actually cut it before the pickup note leading in, so where maybe the ear is used to it by now, expecting that pickup, it just never shows up here. And then I've got some maybe slightly unusual sounds. I think I've used these on the channel before, but rather than sticking to purely the white noise risers and transitions, I grabbed from, I think, the same pack, some more like synthy sweeps that are a tonic. So this one happens to be an A. And then I've got this two vocal hits, or like a synth hit and a vocal hit that I, obviously matched the pitch for. And I feel like these make really nice impact moments that complement the guitar melody really nicely in the places that they come in. So I introduce those right at the first drop. It makes for this nice big huge explosion of sound that thins out a bit and lets the guitar melody carry. And then I've got this transition into the B section where a bunch of things drop out. And I've got a more subdued hit here to complement what the guitar is doing. I've got more percussion coming in halfway through the B section. Our automation hasn't fully changed. The bass hasn't come back in, but that's complemented with this other big vocal hit, another synth hit complementing some space in the guitar and that strum guitar part. And then once again, we got a big synth sweep, some white noise transitions, and a little bit of a laser as we hit the climax of the song, where I've got 3 guitar layers playing all at once and the full accompaniment of the instruments. Oh, and then the one other thing I did with this B section is I actually brought in a new third ambience texture, so just this texture Simber. I'm not actually sure where this one came from either. Just kind of like people at a restaurant type vibe. So it fits with the busy market coffee shop thing, but it's just an extra layer to kind of fill in those highs and bolster it a bit as the track thins out. So hopefully it's appreciable both visibly and from listening that the number and the complexity of the layers is pretty much an exact match for the energy profile I was going for with this particular track. Yeah, I don't know that there's much more exciting stuff to get into with this one, so I'll just let it play us out. Thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions, leave a comment, let me know. Let me know what you want to see me cover next, and I will see you guys next week. Peace.